Thank you and welcome to the show this morning. The topic this morning is Hurricane Katrina, and we're fortunate to have with us to talk about Katrina and some of the aftermaths the professor of sociology at Tennessee State University, Dr. KSanford. And of course, Dr. Sanford, let me welcome you to the show this morning.
Thank you so much, and it's a pleasure being here.
And Dr. Sanford, as we indicated earlier, we've had you on a number of occasions,
yes.
But what we'd like to do today is to talk about what has been considered the worst national disaster in the history of the United States, and we felt that somehow, being a sociologist, you
yes.
could bring some special kind of information to us in reference to that. But now, before we get involved with that, Dr. Sanford, let's have you to give us some information about your background, your education, and some of the things that were important in terms of your career in leading you to Tennessee State University, and then we'll talk about the hurricane and some of the other problems associated with that.
Well, thank you very much. And as you said, I am an associate professor at Tennessee State University, Department of Sociology. Did my formal training at Howard University in Washington, D.C., where I received my doctorate degree, and did a postdoc degree at the Pennsylvania State University in State College, Pennsylvania. And prior to that, I was at North Carolina Central University in Durham, North Carolina. Some of my research interests are in race and ethnic relations, looking at social problems, national disasters, as well as medical sociology.
Very good. Now, let's look at this hurricane, Dr. Sanford. I think that many people will recall that over the last 10 or 12 years, it has always been suggested that somehow New Orleans is sitting in a bowl and that one day there will be a catastrophic event and et cetera. But very few of us pay that much attention to it, you see, but nevertheless it did happen.
Yes.
And of course it might not have been as they had predicted, but nevertheless I think the situation was almost the same. Let's talk about that hurricane and some of the impacts that it has had and will have over the foreseeable future in a real sense.
Absolutely. And first I would like to say, throughout the development of human societies, there have always been natural disasters. And this one is not any more unique than anything that has happened over the history of the world. And so we've always tried to have some preparation for those types of disasters whenever they have occurred throughout the history of not only the United States, but in other parts of the world. Now we are celebrating, well, or commemorating the first anniversary of Hurricane Katrina that occurred on August the 29th, 2005. So now here we are 1 year later, and over 2,000 people had died in this particular hurricane. Now, hurricanes, of course, were not unique to this particular area. However, some of the territorial type of circumstances, as you mentioned, being in that type of a bowl, if you can imagine, a soup bowl or a cereal bowl, and they're in the bottom of it. And as time has passed by, many hurricanes have come through, say at the level of a 1 or 2, and maybe even a 3. One of the worst ones that had occurred was called Hurricane Betsy back in 1965, where it was perceived at that time as the water continued to increase, it started to impact certain rich areas, and dynamite, the levee was dynamited so that water could go into that other area of the 9th Ward. So many people there died. But even with that one in consideration, Hurricane Katrina was much worse.
You mean this earlier hurricane, Hurricane Betsy? Why don't you say something about that in reference? So we've got a couple of minutes before. Now, you said that this hurricane essentially affected the more prosperous areas, and somehow, go on, explain that.
Okay, well, my point was there was some very middle class, upper middle class areas in New Orleans area at that particular time period. And as the water started to rising, they knew that it would probably flow in that direction. So it is a known fact that the authorities went in and actually put an explosion on the levee that would then allow the water to seep from those rich areas into the lower wards. And that is essentially what is hypothesized that happened this time. Because as we get into the talks a little bit more about Hurricane Katrina, we will discover that the hurricane, which was a Hurricane 5 level, had gone through, and on the next day, people in the 9th Ward had come outside of their homes and were thanking God that they had survived yet another hurricane. And it wasn't until a little while after that that the levees broke. And that's when all of the water and the devastation came in.
Mm-hmm.
So in a parallel way, when you look at the engineering of the levee back in 1965, engineers knew at that time that that levee would only hold to a certain degree.
And so in a real sense, some of the charges that have been made in reference to perhaps this might have been a natural disaster, but it was helped by the policies that might have been followed by earlier administrations, or even perhaps this administration.
Absolutely.
And of course, let's take this first commercial break, Dr. Sanford, and then we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. We're talking